Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we continue our Star Wars Tactics series. So far we've covered why trench warfare was still used in ground combat. We also looked at why Star Wars dogfights usually take place at line-of-sight ranges with unguided energy weapons. We found some surprisingly good reasons to justify this odd combination of future tech and more old-school tactics. Today we're going to take a different approach and look at how close-quarter combat works in the Star Wars galaxy. Now, in our own world, combat distances usually vary due to the type of environments where battles are being fought in. In wide open areas in rural Afghanistan, combat usually took place at several hundreds of meters. That's one of the reasons why the Marines looked into longer barreled weapons like the M27 IAR to replace some of their rifles and squad automatic weapons. In Iraq, many of the battles were fought in urban areas, which meant that oftentimes soldiers were engaging enemies at extremely close ranges. Now, just to clarify, this type of combat, like what the US Marines and Army faced in the Second Battle of Fallujah, is classified as MOUT, or Military Operations in Urban Terrain. Now, this is a broader and more general term. MOUTs also can include a wide range of activities like patrolling, delivering humanitarian aid, making a little cash on the side by selling surplus military hardware on the black market, along with more direct action operations. Now, CQC or CQB falls within this wider category of MOUT operation. So it's not just about being close to your enemy and firing, which seems to actually happen a lot in Star Wars for some reason. Now, CQC is specifically an operation where attackers assault defenders in an enclosed space like a building or a vehicle. So while this clone and droid are firing at each other at extremely close ranges, this is not considered a CQC operation, just stupidity. At longer ranges and more open battlefields, a more advanced force has many tactical advantages. They can use combined arms and their numerical advantages. But a close-quarter battle is basically an equalizer, which is why units specialized in CQB operations go through extensive training to minimize risk and maximize efficiency. In the Star Wars galaxy, every faction from the Republic to the Galactic Empire had their own special forces. Some of these units were specialized in direct action, which also included CQB. The Republic during the Clone War era had the famous Clone Commandos, who specialized in close-quarter combat, hostage, and asset recovery. During the Galactic Empire, the average Stormtrooper squad had to be cross-trained as not only infantry units, but also as peacekeepers. Stormtroopers were oftentimes deployed in heavy urban areas and were familiar with basic close-quarter combat tactics. Now, the planning phase of a CQB operation is extremely important because there are naturally very small margins for error in these kind of combat situations, and the likelihood of casualties is relatively high. So every piece of intel that can prepare you for a mission matters. First, what is the purpose for your mission? Are you a Stormtrooper squad trying to storm a rebel stronghold? Or are you clone commandos who need to infiltrate a separatist camp in order to extract some captured Republic official? It's also important to figure out who is in the target location of the building or vehicle you are assaulting, and whether you'll be dealing with just combatants or are there civilians and hostages thrown into the mix as well. All these different factors will determine what kind of weapons and tactics your commander chooses to use in this combat scenario. Now, if Stormtroopers are involved in some heavy urban combat and know that most civilians have already cleared the immediate area and only armed insurgents remain, this means they can basically use the full might of the Empire in their glorious endeavor. On the other hand, if there are civilians or hostages present, or maybe the target house is located in a crowded, popular neighborhood, less lethal options are required to limit civilian casualties and collateral damage. There's also going to be times where you just don't have enough time to gather intel and you're just going to have to raid a building without really knowing what's inside of it. But luckily, Star Wars has a lot of advanced technologies that will help you gather the necessary intel to prepare your forces. First, in the Star Wars galaxy, you have all different types of droids that can be useful for infiltration, whether it's a gonk droid or a mouse droid or maybe something even smaller. Holoprojector recording technology also gives the soldier the ability to capture 3D images of a location, which is far superior to just having a 2D image. You can almost recreate the target building or location in 3D and then using VR technology do a dry run-through in a simulation. Then of course we have Jedi who can literally use the Force and find individuals through the wall and sense what state of alertness they're in. Some more powerful Jedis can even subdue or kill using the Force or use mind tricks to manipulate what they're doing. Needless to say, a Jedi would be the ultimate tool in any close quarter combat situation. Now you're also going to have to consider what kind of structure you're assaulting. Are you assaulting a building? If so, what kind of materials is it made out of? Is it wood? Is it brick? Is it stone? Can it withstand the use of heavy energy weapons for breaching without bringing the entire building down? Maybe it's a factory and full of Tabana gas or worse, baridium, limiting the type of weapons you can use. If the location you're about to assault is a starship, a frigate for instance, you'll want to avoid using detonators or anything that can cause a hull breach. Now you've taken all these things into consideration and are ready to make a breach into an occupied building. Now you have to figure out, where are your defenders? Are they rebels that are trapped in a building and have fully prepared their safe house with traps and ambushes? In that case, maybe a traditional ground assault will be a bad idea because the rebels have already set up kill zones in the doorway. If you had access to stormtroopers with jetpacks, perhaps an insertion team going from the roof down will be able to surprise the enemy and avoid all the prepared defenses. Or maybe you have some heavier caliber energy weapons at your disposal and can make a quick new entryway and breach through one of the walls. The key thing is to make sure that your movements are unpredictable and that the enemy doesn't know where you're going to breach from. On the other hand, you have a scenario where rebels are sneaking into an Imperial factory. In this case, the Empire doesn't really know you're here, so the potential for a stealth insertion would be highly recommended. Now, there are many different ways you can breach a building. You could do something as easy as picking a lock and quietly going in, or use something more heavy like a sledgehammer or even explosives. The Jedi also add some interesting options. The lightsaber is a terrific cutting tool and can create new entries and exits relatively quickly through almost any material. There's also the option of mind tricking someone to open the door for you. Now, the makeup of a fire team or a breaching squad will differ from one faction to another. The Republic commandos usually work in 4-man squads and sometimes team up with other squads. This is not all that different from your average army fire team in size. A 4-man entry team usually carries a mixture of carbines, breaching weapons, and at least one automatic rifle. Clone troopers getting involved in CQB are also going to want to avoid longer, more bulkier blasters like the DC-15, which will severely limit mobility and target acquisition time in enclosed areas. Something like a DC-15A or the E-11 carbine used by stormtroopers is a much better alternative. The E-11 also has the added benefit of having a powerful wide radius stun setting, which can quickly render an entire room unconscious. The stun setting also works really well against any kind of force user with a lightsaber or Jedi, should you be unfortunate enough to go against one of them. When in an enclosed space fighting against a force user wielding a lightsaber, avoid using any kind of energy weapon that can be reflected back at you. So stick with weapons with physical projectiles or, like we talked about, stun weapons. A scattergun or a scatter blaster might be useful as a breaching tool. It's also terrific in close quarter combat situations. Now, obviously, if you have a Jedi, you're probably going to want them taking part in the actual initial breach. There are competing philosophies on how Jedi should be used in a breaching process. The fact that they carry a large glowing sword does make them a great distraction. Having a Jedi enter a structure first and absorb most of the incoming fire, which they usually can block or even reflect, will reduce friendly casualties. Also, this will allow the remaining breach team to enter the room and fan out behind the Jedi into points of control in the room and eliminate and suppress any other enemies remaining. You could also potentially have your Jedi stay behind and use mind tricks to distract individuals away from the breach point, allowing your breaching team to have the upper hand when they enter a room. Now, most CQB doctrine recommends using some kind of lethal or non-lethal explosion or disorientation device before entering an occupied room, especially if they are aware of the breaching team's presence. In the Star Wars galaxy, we have a wide variety of detonators, EMP pulse explosives, and more traditional flash or sonar non-lethal grenades. These can be effectively used to give the breach team a big advantage during the initial breach. You also have high explosive breaches, which can create a similar stunning effect against enemy combatants. The Republic commandos were known for using these kinds of breaching charges, which are actually very similar to what real-world militaries use. Now, the high possibility of getting shot at during a close quarter combat situation means extra layers of armor is definitely worth it. The Republic commandos again have Katarn armor, which is terrific, and even had a shield layer on top, which when combined with the armor can stop most types of energy rounds at point-blank ranges. They can even stop something as vicious as a Verpine Shattergun. Mandalorian armor was also a good alternative, and also consider using personal or handheld shields for additional protection for the initial breach. While armor is very important in these kind of situations, speed is even more important. A squad needs to be precise, well coordinated, and overwhelm the enemy with firepower and quick movement. It's especially important not to have your team get bogged down in kill zones like doorways and intersections where maybe the enemy has prepared ambushes already. So you're going to want highly disciplined, well-trained, and fearless soldiers taking part in these kind of aggressive operations. The Separatist army had a distinct advantage by deploying droids, which were not only fearless, but their quicker reaction time allowed them to efficiently engage enemy combatants, and their super strength and speed made them extremely difficult to fight in close quarters. So as we can see, CQB operations in Star Wars isn't all that different from our own world. There's a heavy emphasis on using stealth, speed, precision, firepower to quickly surprise and overwhelm your defenders. And as always, use every piece of advanced technology and space magic at your disposal, because there's no such thing as being over-prepared. So that is our video on Star Wars Close Quarter Combat. Let me know in the comments section below what you think and also what you want to see next. And also don't forget to check out our other videos in the series. We cover why there's trench warfare in Star Wars and also why most Star Wars dogfights happen within visual range and why they don't use guided munitions. Anyway, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.